Now, big thanks to Ross, Jay, and Lexi for hosting those fantastic educational talks. They were great. Look, I hung out in many of the chat rooms. I know some of you probably saw me commenting. I'm like, I'm the MC. I got to get ready to introduce our next speaker. But this guy, Jay, is really killing it right now. I'm very excited to announce our next keynote speaker. Creativity strategist Natalie Nixon is the creativity whisperer to the C-suite. Marketing guru Seth Godin has said that she can help you get unstuck and unlock the work that you do. So Natalie is the author of the award-winning book, The Creativity Leap, Unleashing Curiosity, Improvisation, and Intuition at Work, and has been ranked among the top 50 keynote speakers in the world by real leaders. Valued for her accessible expertise on creativity, the future of work, and innovation. And as CEO of Figure Eight Thinking, she advises leaders on transformation by applying wonder and rigor to amplify growth and business value. Her work has been featured in Forbes, Fast Company, and Inc., and her clients have included some big names: Google, Meta, Deloitte, Salesforce, and VaynerMedia. So prepare to be inspired, empowered, and entertained. Please join me and give a virtual round of applause. You can put some emojis in the chat in welcoming our keynote speaker, Natalie Nixon.
Wonderful to be with the Vimeo community. Thank you so much for having me. Before we begin, 3 quick notes. First, we're going to have some time for questions, so please make sure you jot down any questions that occur to you so you can save them for the end. Secondly, if you're interested in anything that I shared today, I will be preparing to share a link where you can have a summary of my slide deck. And third, I have a small gift for everyone at the end. So we're talking today about why creativity drives the bottom line. And the way I like to frame my conversation today is in 2 sections. Part 1, I'm going to lay the context for why creativity is not a nice to have. It is a must have. It's not woo-woo. It is an imperative right now for how we have to navigate work, as well as to prepare us for the future of work. So that's the part 1 of my remarks. The second part, where we're going to land the plane, is I want to leave you with practical, tactical tools to enable you to apply a lot of the ideas I'm sharing today, later today, within the next month, and throughout the year. So let's begin with the context of why creativity is not a nice to have, but a must have, an imperative for the way you work and drive the bottom line in your business. I'm starting with this image that occurred in December of 2020, when we were in the thick of really getting used to the COVID-19 pandemic. It was on the front cover of the New Yorker magazine on December 7th, 2020, and it's an illustration by Adrienne Tomine, and it's called Love Life. And in it, you see a woman getting ready for a virtual date. She has a cocktail in one hand, she has her smartphone device in the other, she has her laptop stacked on a stack of books, and her kitchen is a bit of a mess. Her bedroom, as you can see, behind her is a bit messy as well. And the more you look at this illustration, the more incredible details that you see. Well, this visual went viral because so many of us can relate to what I call the blurred boundaries that this is really speaking to. The blurred boundaries between work and home, home and play, play and learning, etc., etc. So in the midst of this incredibly ambiguous terrain, we have to figure out how to navigate our way forward. And in my view, we have to navigate our way forward operating under 2 assumptions. My first assumption is that incredibly disruptive events will occur in an increasing clip, and they're going to occur in our natural environment as well as in our business environment. That's my first assumption. My second assumption is that algorithmic science is going to improve, and it's going to be embedded in the ways that we live and work. And that's the good news, bad news, right? It often feels like in the midst of these 2 assumptions, there's not a lot that we can actually control. But what we can control is our creative capacity and our ability to build our creative capacity. And when we commit to building our creative capacity as individuals, among our teams, And within our organizations, there's three things that happen. Number one, you begin to have much more visceral pattern recognition. Secondly, you interrupt stale mental models. You don't find yourself muttering under your breath, well, we tried that already 7 years ago. You're open to the new and you suspend judgment. And the third thing that happens when you invest in building your creative capacity is that you engage in a lot more collaborative work and efforts. Creativity is the engine for innovation. As I said already, it's not woo-woo, and it's not an addendum to the important stuff. So what exactly is an innovation? An innovation is an invention converted into scalable value. And that value can be social value, financial value, or cultural value. But we can't go from the invention, the one-off, to the scalable value until we embed creativity into the process. So creativity is that converter from the one-off invention to the scalable innovation. I want to make sure I share some of the data and research behind how salient, prescient, and relevant creativity is increasingly becoming. So the World Economic Forum, for example, back in 2015 said that creativity would rank as the number 10 job skill for 2020 and beyond. 1 year later, in 2016, they said, actually, we think creativity is going to rank as the number 3 job skill. And creativity has kind of paced itself as the number 3 job skill for 2020 and beyond up until this year. In 2023, the World Economic Forum announced that actually creativity is the number 2 job skill that we need to keep in mind to build our companies in a forward-thinking, innovative fashion. The rest of the data that I want to share with you comes from Thrive My Way research, where one of their data points share that 60% of CEOs who've been polled said that creativity is a really important leadership quality. At the same time, 75% of people are thinking that they're not actually living up to the creative potential, and 46% of workers say that they are not given enough time during the year to actually be creative in their place of work. And finally, 7 out of 10 people are thinking that creativity is absolutely a crucial driver in our economy. Well, what to make of all these numbers? Basically, there's a bit of a gap analysis between acknowledging that creativity is super important, but actually allowing the space and time to be creative. So here's the headline. Soft skills are totally hardcore. Soft skills such as actively listening, collaboration, being able to negotiate, being able to empathize and ask better questions, especially in a time of ubiquitous tech, AI, automation, and robotics. Anything that helps to amplify what makes us uniquely human is going to set you, your team, and your company apart. So what exactly is creativity? I throw around the word a lot. I call myself a creativity strategist, so you're totally within your rights if you're wondering, how exactly am I defining creativity? Well, I'm glad you asked. Oftentimes, as I was building my company, Figure 8 Thinking, I'd be invited into companies to help them build cultures of innovation. And I would observe that everyone had a very different definition of innovation. And I began to suspect that we were starting in the wrong place by only starting with innovation. I suspected that we actually had to start with creativity. The challenge was that if I walked into the hallowed halls of most corporate environments and said, hey guys, we actually need to start with creativity, they would probably look at me like I had 3 heads. And that's because I quickly realized we don't understand creativity. Sometimes when we think about creativity, we only think about, for example, musicians, or we may also think about visual artists, people who are gifted to tell story visually through paint or sculpture, and we might have a really idealized view of that, sunlight shafting down on them as they while away the afternoon. Perhaps we think of dancers, people who are skilled and talented to tell story through movement. And if you also think of the arts, when you think of creativity, that's totally fine, but that's only part of the story. Because artists happen to be exceptional at wrestling with the ambiguity of the creative process. What I wanted to land with was a simple, accessible definition of creativity that would democratize creativity for everyone so that they could innovate on a consistent and scalable basis. And I wrote about it in a book called The Creativity Leap. Here's the definition I landed on. That creativity is our ability to toggle between wonder and rigor to solve problems, produce novel value, and generate meaning. And if we begin to think about creativity in this way as toggling between wonder and rigor to solve problems, then we quickly realize that the best accountants and doctors and plumbers and lawyers and farmers and teachers and artists are super creative when they're toggling between wonder and rigor to solve problems. So here's what I know to be true, that in a world where we can work from anywhere and we can learn from anywhere, those companies that work at the intersection of productivity, technology, and meaningful human experience are going to be the ones that thrive and flourish. But amongst my clients, typically they have 2 out of the 3 down. They're really good at being productive, and they're just trying to figure out what's the tech platform we should use. Or they're technology companies, and they're trying to figure out how to build their productivity. But very few have figured out how to also integrate meaningful human connection, colleague to colleague, as well as client facing. I'm a bit biased, but in my view, the through line between productivity, tech, and meaningful human experience is creativity. It's our creative capacity that we have to build upon, especially if we want to drive bottom line. So let me unpack a little bit what I mean by wonder. Wonder is about audacity and deep curiosity and the ability to pause and be in awe. I often remind people that it's kind of hard to wonder when you're going 80 miles an hour. And the more I researched wonder, the more I learned that some really smart people historically have given a lot of credence to wonder. So for example, Socrates said that wisdom begins in wonder. And then centuries later, the Jewish theologian and civil rights activist Abraham Heschel wrote that it's wonder rather than doubt, which is the root of all knowledge. So if you want to become wiser and build your capacity for knowledge, begin to design more space and more time to wonder. Now, the second dimension of creativity that's super important to keep in mind is rigor. And this is the dimension that we typically brush under the rug and forsake, because we think creativity is doing whatever you feel like. Well, not exactly. All creative achievements have required an immense amount of discipline, focus, time on task, and skill mastery. And these are all of the attributes of rigor, not to be confused with rigidity, 2 totally different things. While rigidity says we've decided on this pathway forward and we're not going to budge, rigor is much more adaptive and pays attention to the landscape and environment. So the original Renaissance man himself, Leonardo da Vinci, said that any obstacle can be destroyed through rigor. So if you want to build the creative capacity of your organization in order to innovate on a consistent, sustainable basis, you must invest in both wonder and rigor. Because creativity is a productivity play, it is absolutely fundamental for our well-being, and it's a competency. It's something that you can get better at the more you commit to it and exercise it. Now, more germane to our conversation today, I want to really explicitly point out that creativity has a business ROI. And I'm going to show you that in 3 examples. Number 1, we are most creative when we engage in inventive, sometimes even preposterous thinking that gets us thinking beyond our typical boundaries. And we begin to engage in new business activities. We might find new strategic partners that ultimately unwrap for us new revenue streams. That's a business impact that starts with inventive thinking. Example number 2, creativity benefits from much more collaborative efforts. Even though we might not want to collaborate at the beginning of a project because we think, why do we have to explain what we do to other people? Excuse me, that was my earring. Why do we have to explain what we do to other people? The best creative efforts are really much more beneficial through collaboration. When we collaborate, productivity increases, efficiencies go up, and when efficiencies go up, costs go down. That's a business impact. And finally, when we are more creative, we don't try to just churn out the same services and products and experiences that we've been doing for the last 12 years or so. We become client obsessed. So we have to get out of the building and we have to understand, what do our clients need versus what do we want them to have? And that ultimately generates much greater value in the marketplace. This is a clear way for you to understand the connection between creativity and your business ROI. So now I'm at the part of our conversation where I want to give you practical, tactical tools to actually exercise and apply some of these ideas to your work. So let's begin. Let's begin with thinking about 3 shifts that you must be willing to do in your mental model, in the way you go about thinking about your work, interaction with your colleagues, and with your clients. Let's do this through the lenses of what I call the 3I creativity framework, which is about inquiry, improvisation, and intuition. I'm going to go through each one of these lenses, let's say, and give you some really specific examples. So shift number 1, we have to shift away from absolute certainty to curiosity. What exactly is curiosity? There's a great book by Ian Leslie called Curious. And in this book, Ian Leslie talks about how curiosity is the product of an information gap. So think about that. You need to know just a little bit about something to be curious. Think of a small toddler who wanders into a kitchen and maybe there's a gas range fire burner that's on. The blue color is familiar. Maybe they're really enticed by the movement of the flame. They know just a little bit about that activity and they may extend their arm out. And hopefully there's an adult in the room who grabs their arm before they can get burned. But that's what curiosity actually is. And I love the way Laura Hodgson, who's the CEO of a great company called Now. Now is all about making sure that small and medium-sized enterprises can get access to cash flow. She talks about how much more important it is to notice rather than to know. When we notice, we engage in challenging our own assumptions, and we engage in a lot more self-inquiry that builds our curiosity. So many leaders today have been talking about empathy, that empathy is the skill of the future. And I agree with them. Empathy is super important as we think about the future of work. At the same time, we're missing a step, because before you can empathize with the soul, you must be able to ask a new set of questions. For example, why do they do it this way and not our way? How come? Why do they sit over there and not over here with us? If we can't even frame the question, we can never walk a mile in someone else's shoes. So curiosity comes before empathy. It is the precursor to empathy. And from my perspective, curiosity is the currency of our future. Think about new jobs that weren't even around 5 years ago. For example, prompt engineers. This comes from the website of the company Upwork. To be a great prompt engineer, you must be able to frame and ask better questions. The same for all of the computer scientists and coders who are building the important algorithms for AI. I wrote about this in an article for Fast Company, where my perspective is that we shouldn't have a utopian view of AI, not a dystopian view, but we need to view AI as our co-pilot, not our pilot. It's our co-pilot to be a catalyst for it to be much more improvisational and much more curious. So here are 3 tactical, practical things you can begin doing to build your curiosity. Number 1, engage in creative abrasion with your teams. Creative abrasion is a term that Jerry Hirschberg made up. Jerry used to be the head of design at Nissan, the automotive company. And every time his design team had a design challenge on an automobile, he would invite in people from finance, HR, manufacturing, and sales. And he knew that people who come from different backgrounds might at first rub up against each other in some kind of uncomfortable ways. Ultimately, that abrasion, that friction leads to energy. So he said, let's convert that energy into something positive. So here's what you could do. Whatever project your team is working on, intentionally invite in someone from a completely different department and welcome their fresh eyes perspective and their questions. Number 2, engage in lateral thinking, which in the design thinking field simply means get out of the building and look at near and far adjacent sectors to understand what you can learn from them. What this might look like for you is to ask people on your team to engage in checking out new webinars that are completely different sectors. For example, if you work in healthcare technology, check out some webinars that are in the fashion industry and understand what you can learn from the way people in fashion are problem solving and what you can bring back to your team. And third, consider hiring a resident futurist to be part of your company, either on a rotating basis or on a permanent basis. Because futurists don't predict the future, we actually are much more pressing about what's happening right now in the current state and thinking of new questions. The second mental model shift you need to have is to shift away from only focusing on what's rational to engaging in your intuition. Intuition is a type of pattern recognition. It's that nudge that I should go left and not right. So, for my book, The Creativity Leap, I interviewed over 50 people who come from a number of sectors. Here's a small sampling on the screen. They include a husband and wife farming team, an attorney who does incredible child advocacy policy work, a nose, a perfume who's smelling my arm, who, by the way, says that her superpower is to be able to toggle between chemistry and intuition, and even our family plumber, who was shocked that I wanted to interview him for a book about creativity. But in all of these interviews, there was always a moment when I asked people, please share a story about a time when you used your intuition to make a strategic choice. And when I asked this gentleman, whose name is Biplab Sarkar, he's the CEO of Vectorworks, I was actually a little nervous because Biplab has a PhD in electrical engineering. He's a big techie. He is the CEO of a software company. And I thought, he's going to laugh me out of the room when I asked him to share about intuition. And I was so wrong. He totally waxed poetically about all the ways that he integrates his intuition into strategy. So that got me to thinking, what if we shifted our KPIs to also think about intuiting more? So for example, if we thought about how might technology prompt pausing? What if we normalize play and tie that to performance review? Because after all, play is about all sorts of executive functioning skills, such as collaboration and negotiation and actively listening. And what if sensorial design and emotional design became mainstreamed? So the great neuroscientist, David Eagleman, his whole research is about what if we could feel data? So these sorts of questions are not far off. Here's what you could do. Begin to pay attention and document the nudge. Document when your intuition is telling you to go left and not right. You can start to journal about it. Secondly, if you're a leader or a manager, openly share the ways your intuition is informing all the big data, all the Excel sheets, and all of the analytical data. This will give your team courage to also share and act upon their intuition combined with the strategic initiatives. And third, integrate technology that amplifies what makes us uniquely human. So for example, the Calm app is a wonderful example of that sort of technology. The third mental model shift that I think would be really great for us to do is to shift away from planning to improvising. Now, if this slide gives you the heebie-jeebies, I totally understand when I say that plans are fiction. But why do I say plans are fiction? They haven't happened yet. So your budgets, your daily to-do lists, these are all fictional. And I have a daily to-do list, but because I understand that plans are fiction, it helps me to be a lot more adaptive as I go about my day. And here's the great news. You actually improvise every single day. Probably between breakfast and lunch, you have to hack your way through supporting a spouse, a child, a client, or a colleague. My perspective is that instead of trying to make work look like a finely tuned orchestra where everyone's bow is up at the same position, what if we began to think and act a lot more like jazz musicians who embrace errors, who understand that there can be a give and take between soloing and supporting. For example, in the Vimeo community itself, there are some great examples of improvisation. So Paychex, especially during the start of the pandemic, figured out ways to develop meaningful messaging using the Vimeo platform. And Zendex started an entire morning show using the Vimeo platform. This required being able to be experimental, adaptive, and saying yes and all of the attributes of improvisation. Here's what you can do on a practical basis to begin to improvise more. Number one, integrate prototypes into your daily work. A prototype is a rough draft, ugly mock-up of an idea. In fact, the uglier, the better. So doodles are great examples of prototypes. Begin to have meetings where you ask people for the first 5 minutes of the meeting to doodle their answer to a question prompt that you offer. Then begin to parlay those doodles, those initial rough draft sketches and prototypes into pop-ups. So the Benefit Cosmetics Company, for example, has done all sorts of cool pop-ups to test new ideas. Prototyping and pop-ups help you to fail early and often, and you save hundreds of thousands, if not millions of dollars. And finally, in your personal life, engage in becoming a clumsy student of anything. Because when we are clumsy students in our personal lives, it rewires the neural synapses in our brain so that when we come back to work, we're a lot more eager to be improvisational, intuitive, and ask better and different questions. These are the 3 I's. Go forth and use them well. And remember, the connection between these 3 I's and your business ROI is pretty clear. When we have more inventive thinking that leads to higher revenue, we must ask different questions. When we are trying to build a collaborative work culture, we must be much more experimental and improvisational. And when we are customer obsessed, we're getting out of the building and we are following our intuition in order to build market value. To conclude, I'd love to share this gift with the entire Vimeo community. It's a Wonder Rigor tip sheet. It's 16 ways to amplify wonder and rigor in your personal life and at work. I'd love for you to check it out. If you are interested in seeing some summary of what I shared today, also take a look at this link or snap this QR code and you can have a summary of the ideas that I shared today. And finally, you have it totally within your power to up the ante on your curiosity, your intuition, and your improvisation. It absolutely connects to the business ROI of your company. Thank you so much.
Don't leave, Natalie, don't leave. Way to go. Let me tell you something.
Thank you.
Natalie got so busy, she lost the earring.
I did.
I got it. That's when you know you're delivering.
Thank you.
From the heart and the soul.
Thank you.
Look, you said something that caught my attention. We're going to do a quick little Q&A and we have some questions from you. But I paid attention. I love that Shane Monroe, Sameh Nissim, Laurie Sprague, and David Weber also had some great comments about this. And it was, creativity is an inspired action born from the present moment. So in the present moment, I changed.
I love that. I love your jacket.
Kind of made me think about that.
Awesome.
And I love the prototyping and the pop-ups. In the video world, would a prototype be like a sizzle reel? Not yet necessarily a pilot, but like a sizzle?
A prototype actually starts before that in a storyboard, something that you're just doodling. You're getting people's reactions in the moment before you even want to invest in the sizzle reel. The fact that young people can make some interesting feature films on their iPhones or their smartphone devices is another example of prototyping.
Okay, great. And then once we get to that, then we're actually maybe making a trailer or shooting something like that. That's the pop-up, so to speak.
Totally. And it is affecting your bottom line because you get to fail earlier and often before you invest all the time and resources that require feature film.
Okay, this is a great one. Should you sell a creative idea to a client even if it's out of their budget but it solves the problem?
Well, you want to make sure that you're pitching in a way where you're co-creating with the client, because then you're more likely to get the buy-in. So even if at the early stages, going back to our prototyping and storyboarding idea, if you're engaging with the client, they're a lot more likely to be willing to invest the higher dollar amounts that will get you the business that you're really hoping to get.
I like this because you're not pitching an idea for feedback to criticize it. Because often when we pitch an idea, it's already set up for them to criticize it as opposed to partnering with it.
Partnering,
yeah, I like
exactly.
that. Okay, last question. What would you say to people who don't believe they have the time to indulge in creativity?
You don't have the time not to indulge in creativity. Seriously, because of the preponderance of artificial intelligence and robotics and automation, what makes us uniquely human and innately human is going to set us apart. It's going to set you apart. And it's so important to invest in it now on a personal level as well as on an organizational
Is there a very
basis.
small step before we wrap up? Is there like a minuscule step that someone's like, I'm not creative? What can they do?
I actually think people should pay attention to one of the last tips I gave, which is to become a clumsy student of something. For me, it's ballroom dance. Anything that you're into right now, Mark? Any hobbies?
Piano.
Okay, right?
And I'm stumbling all over that keyboard.
Awesome, right? Because that actually is going to bring that courage into your work. That's a great place to start.
I love that. The vulnerability there is great. Thanks to Natalie Nixon. I want to give you a round of applause for that. Thank you so much for hopefully now we all feel equipped to get back to our organizations and unlock the power of creativity within ourselves and our teams and watch that ROI soar, right? Now, if you missed any part of today's event or want to check out the sessions you didn't get to watch, don't worry, we got you covered. Sessions will be posted and ready to roll on September 29th. So if you registered, you'll get an email with an invitation to our video on demand library to see the other sessions or rewatch your favorite track. Again, this is a great time for you to bring some of your friends and colleagues together that didn't get a chance to see it and watch it with you. Now, how many of you have posted out to your favorite social media site during one of our sessions? I want to see it. Let's keep the comments, inspiration, screenshots. I've been taking crazy screenshots, y'all. Like crazy. Am I the only one taking crazy screenshots? If you do that, do hashtag Vimeo OTF. Hashtag Vimeo OTF. Now, next up, we're headed into 3 mini masterclasses that they're going to be bite-sized learning opportunities packed with how-to tips and tricks for instantly elevating your skills as a marketer or creator. Again, 3 tracks, your choice. If you choose the Be Original track with Gavin Guidry, creative director at Spotify, you'll walk away with the key ingredients to make relevant video content. Hint, it includes creator collaborations, which is really cool. Be Experimental, now that welcomes Mike Caput, Chief Content Officer of the Marketing AI Institute, who will share how to get started with AI and unlock productivity with a helpful use case model. And our Be Visible track is led by Dimitri Shamis, VP of Brand and Creative at 7 Rooms and creator of the Scaling Creative Framework, who will show you how to leverage self-service systems within your organization to boost your creative output. All right, so have a great time in your mini masterclasses, and I'll meet you in the next session in 15 minutes. Let's go.